Hello everyone, so we're going to look at the early pioneers. So these are the people who crossed the Great Plains. So they went from the east, went over the Mississippi River, and then they went over the Great Plains to try to go west. Usually at first to go to Oregon, then later to California. So we're going to look at the different groups of people that move west, how their journey goes and what happens. So one word that keeps coming up, and it's one that we definitely need to be aware of, is manifest destiny. So this is the idea that it's the God-given right of those who live, those white Americans, those settlers who come from Europe. It's their God-given right and their duty to go across America. So that land is free for them to take. And in the 1840s, there are 4 areas that the US want to sort of spread into. It's Texas, Oregon, California, and then the vast prairies, which is places like later on being like Nebraska and Kansas. But it's Utah that we're talking about for the moment. And the emigrants go west on those wagon trains, and they thought they were doing God's will. So God was the one who was sending them across. And they would bring with them ideas of Christianity and freedom that would be able to tame those savage Indians. So they thought that the land wasn't being used, it was being wasted, so it needed to be taken. So they were going to control this frontier, they were going to shape this frontier, and by doing so, create modern America. So they thought it was their duty to do this. Right, so let's get going. So as we go through these, just like we usually do, as the picture appears, you're writing down the key piece of information, and then as you watch through, maybe the second time, what can you remember without me having to jog your memory, just looking at the pictures? So the first group we're going to look at is the mountain men. They were the fur trappers who went into the mountains and started to find the roots. So they're mainly looking after beaver. That was what they wanted to find. So, fur trappers were the first white men to cross the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains. They were trapping beaver and they were hunting antelope for their fur. So the first people were those who were crossing the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains, were going for beaver fur and antelope fur. So they thought, oh, that's a nice beaver. They killed it, they nicked its fur. Crucially, they found routes through the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada. So they found safe routes to go through these really treacherous and remote places like the Rockies and the Sierra Nevada. Remember, the Sierra Nevada have mountains that are 14,000 foot high. So that's over 3 times the size of Ben Nevis. So they're really quite big. Mountain men were also excellent trackers. And some of them worked with the Indians. And some of them actually had quite good relationships with the Indians. Sometimes they fought. So they used some of the knowledge that the Indians had given them to be able to be excellent trackers. So they'd look at the footprints in the ground, and they'd look at where the beaver had been, where wolves had been, where the antelope had been, and they'd use those. Unfortunately, as the mountain men came across America, they brought with them guns, alcohol, smallpox, and sexually transmitted diseases, most commonly syphilis. So they brought with them guns, alcohol, smallpox, and sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis. And that leads to a lot of deaths, particularly of Native Americans. There's actually some horrible stories about the Native Americans being given blankets with smallpox scabs in deliberately by early settlers. Crucially though, the government explorers in the Rockies and the Sierra Nevada created maps. So they created maps and charts that described how you could go through the Rocky Mountains or the Sierra Nevada using a wagon. So they created maps and charts, the guidebooks if you will, to help people be able to get west. And finally, mountain men also set up trading posts where agents could buy from fur trappers and mountain men, and they could spread news. So these are really important because they say things like, "Ooh, don't go down that pass, there's been some rockfall," or "Ooh, there's a particularly bad winter at the moment, I wouldn't go that way," or "Ooh, be careful, there's a Native American camp quite near there that's following the buffalo." So they could spread news and information about the journey west. It also meant people travelling west could get food and supplies. So the mountain men were the first of the early pioneers to go west. A second thing that leads to people travelling west is the Oregon Trail. That was a practical way for early migrants to cross the mountains with wagons. So it was a route commonly used to cross mountains with wagons. And it was first published in 1825, and it explained a route that went through the south of the Rocky Mountains, called the South Pass. So it found a safe route through the south of the Rocky Mountains in 1825. The first migrants went with a covered wagon, went in 1836. Now, over time, the number of people who take this journey successfully increases. So in 1841, a party of 60 made the trip. By 1842, 100, and 900 by 1843. So we go from 60 to 100 to 900 making the journey. The US government encouraged people to move west and provided $30,000 for a map of the trail. So the government gave $30,000 to create a map of the trail. This map and the reports that went with it became the guidebook which people used on the trail to help them go west. Unfortunately though, some white settlers got caught up in raids by Native Americans. These were incredibly rare, but were spoken about a lot in the media. So some parties travelling on the Oregon Trail were attacked by Native Americans who were raiding their wagons. This was really rare, but stories of it became quite popular and a bit of a fear was created from it. Right, excellent. So we'll now look at the Donner Party. So the Donner Party is a group of people including 60 wagons and 300 migrants who leave Independence in May 1846. Now it all kind of goes wrong at the start. They decided to follow a shortcut to California that Lansford Hastings had put forward. So they decided to follow a shortcut to California that Lansford Hastings had put forward. The problem was it had never been tried. One half of the party followed the shortcut, the other didn't. The Donner Party, which had taken the shortcut, suffered badly in the desert. They argued and one man died. So those who'd taken the shortcut suffered in the desert on the salt flats, and they quarrelled and one man died. When they reached the Sierra Nevada, those mountains which you have to pass over to get into California, they dug in for the winter. And the winter had arrived early. So they dug in for the winter, which had arrived early. At least one died of starvation. A small group tried to get away from this to try to save those who were stranded in the Sierra Nevada. So a small group called the Forlorn Hope tried to get through the blizzard. 4 froze to death, and then they were eaten by the others in the party. By January 1847, only 9 made it through. A rescue party was sent for the rest, those who'd been camping in the wagons in the Sierra Nevada. So a rescue party was sent. Half were dead, and those that had survived had eaten their friends and family. Grim. So that's a really common narrative account question. So you need to know that in chronological order. Right, let's look at another group of people who go west far more successfully. So the Mormons is a Christian religion established in New York State. So the Mormons is a Christian religion established in New York State by Joseph Smith. Now, poor Joseph Smith had had a difficult time since creating the religion in the 1830s. They were attacked by mobs and shot at in Ohio. So the Mormons had a really difficult time. So they were attacked by mobs and they were shot at. So they fled to Ohio. In Kirtland, Ohio, though, the Mormons were blamed for a banking crisis that hit in 1837. And again, they were forced to leave. So they were blamed for a banking crisis in 1837 and were forced to leave. They then moved to Missouri, but again were distrusted, and they were attacked, and Joseph Smith, their leader and founder, was imprisoned. In Nauvoo, which is Nauvoo, so in Nauvoo, the Mormons rebuilt an old section of the town, but Smith was murdered, and Brigham Young became their new leader. Next, Brigham Young moved 1,500 Mormons to the Great Salt Lake. And if you remember, this was an amazing, almost military-style operation where he split each group of 10 wagons, each having a captain and a lieutenant, to be able to plan out the journey, leaving supplies and planting crops to help them get through winter. So Brigham Young successfully moved 1,500 Mormons to the Great Salt Lake. At the Great Salt Lake, the Mormons could practice polygamy, so they could have more than one wife. So at Great Salt Lake, they could practice polygamy because, crucially, it was outside of the US territory. It was actually part of Mexico. So they went to Great Salt Lake for two reasons. One, they could practice polygamy, and two, because it was outside of the USA at that time. Right, the final group we're going to look at is all about those who moved west for the gold rush. And this is the first of lots of gold rushes in America. So in 1848, gold is accidentally discovered in California. Within months, 40,000 people were crossing the Great Plains. "60 ships left ports in America and Europe, going to California." Lots of people weren't actually miners, they just wanted to get rich. So 60 ships left to try to get rich. By the end of 1849, there were 90,000 gold miners in California. These became known as the 49ers. So the 49ers are those 90,000 people who moved west to get rich. Very, very few became rich. And actually, their life was very hard. It was cold. There were problems with diseases like cholera and dysentery. And there were problems with crime. Oh, sorry. The next one is the little one with the truck. Gradually, the gold near the surface was exhausted. It had run out. And the gold mining companies moved in and did it professionally. Now the final one on this is a really sad bit, is that by 1840, between 1858 and 1859, gold is discovered in 3 places: Arizona, Montana, and the Black Hills of Dakota. So gold is discovered in Arizona, Montana, and the Black Hills of Dakota. This led to prospectors, those looking for gold, going over the Sioux Indians' sacred ground, and really does speed up the destruction of the Native American way of life. Really is tragic. Right, you guys, I hope that was a useful summary. All of these questions fit really well for being a narrative account. So you need to know the chronological peel, the story of what happens, so you can answer that 8-mark question, which comes in the middle of the paper. Right, thanks ever so much, you lot. I hope that was useful. Bye-bye.